Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Toolkit Tuesday. I'm one of your hosts this morning, Jenny. My name is Jenny Horner, and with me are my colleagues, Amy Matusik and Colleen Tucker. This morning's topic is assessing strengths, needs, and progress. It's our hope that anyone who works in councils and system of care join us this morning as we take a refresher together on this important topic. I'll be sharing the fundamental reminders and tips of assessing strengths and needs. And then our partners at the Center of Excellence, Nancy Lowry Bragar and Pat Miles, will be joining us for a great discussion on the art or skill of assessing youth. This session will be recorded and shared on our website for future reference. Please either raise your hand or type in the chat box if you have a question or comment. And also, please remember to always remain muted to avoid feedback or background noise unless you're speaking. The presentation and any handouts will be placed in the chat as well at the end of our presentation. A survey will also be available at the end of today, which will help us improve our future meetings. If you don't mind taking the time to complete those, that would be much appreciated. And the success of this morning will fall heavily on your participation and discussion by providing good insight on your experiences. So we'll go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Can everyone see the screen okay? Mine, it looks a little big, but that could be me. There we go. This is our agenda this morning, and we're going to talk about, I'm going to just briefly share, as I said, the fundamentals of assessing youth and families. And we want to encourage you all to remember that you're using these assessments during all phases of service coordination or wraparound. And that includes in the engagement phase of when you're first meeting with the family, when you're planning with the family and the team, when you're implementing a plan, and when you're transitioning them out of service coordination or wraparound. You're using their assessments through all of these phases, and that's what we're going to discuss today. Next slide, please. It is a requirement of the Ohio Revised Code that we have a process in place to ensure that we are examining strengths and needs for families. We have required that you choose one of three, the CANs, which has been widely used across the state of Ohio, and I may actually be referring to it quite a bit in this morning's presentation. We also recommended the CASI that you could use, or an assessment of your choice that has been approved with our office when using service coordination. Next slide, please. And also it's mentioned in your service coordination mechanism that you are describing an assessment tool that you're using to discover strengths and needs and cultural discovery of that child or family. The assessment tool that you're using must contain the following elements, and those are listed below, which include life functioning and independent living, the child's strengths, behavioral and emotional needs, school issues, child risk behaviors, developmental needs, trauma, juvenile justice needs, substance abuse need, and vocational or employment need. All of those must be a part of the assessment tool, those domains. Next slide, please. So this is the first stage of assessing, is when you're engaging and with the family and with the team. And this is when the family meets you and or maybe your youth advocate or a family advocate, and you explore together their strengths and needs and culture. And this is where you're talking about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and the purpose of the assessment. It is, imagine when you meet your employer for the first time, for example, imagine if they sit down with you and how that would go, and they said to you, okay, I want to know everything you're not good at. What do you need work on? Would that be encouraging? Likely not. And so that's the focus of our discussion this morning, is really pulling those strengths and having them drive the plan. Next slide, please. So in that initial phase of engagement, this is when you're actually completing the CANs or the assessment tool, and you're finding all the strengths of the youth, but you're also assessing the strengths of all the family members as well. How can you pull in their strengths into the plan? You're discussing and listing all potential natural supports that they may have, as those themselves are strengths. This is where you're kind of assessing for potential team members that should be on the plan and involved in the plan. This is where you are completing a narrative that summarizes their strengths and their needs and their vision for the future and supports that they may need. This is also when you're reviewing the assessment with them and you're drawing that relationship between the youth and the family. And then you're also, if necessary, you're developing a safety plan, but at a minimum, you're developing a crisis plan as well, based on those strengths and needs, so they know where to turn to in a moment of crisis. Next slide, please. So I list here all of the do's and don'ts for each phase, just for your knowledge. I especially like the don'ts. I think they're very helpful when navigating assessing youth and families. But this goes through how you want to make sure that you're getting a full baseline assessment at the very beginning. You're pulling any records and case files and referral information, but it's also a requirement that you're assessing within the 30 days of referral, because you want to develop that baseline early. And you want to make sure that you have actionable needs for that crisis and safety plan. You don't want to administer an assessment item by item, like a survey. That tends to be intrusive, and families will disengage. You want the assessment to be more of a conversation, and then you listen to them, and then you go back and fill out that assessment. You also don't want to pre-populate a plan of care all on your own before the team meets. You want to make sure that you're assessing and then you're sharing those results with the team, and together you develop that plan of care. Next slide, please. The next stage then is actually planning. And this is where the team comes together and they learn about the family's strengths and needs and vision. And then they create a mission together, a team mission, and they decide what's best for that plan of care. Next slide, please. This is where the coordinator then brings the team together to discuss that plan. And they review, as I said, all the strengths of the youth and family. They review the list of any needs, and they might add to it. And they determine outcomes that are measurable that will transpire when the needs are met. They'll brainstorm to strategize meeting these needs, and they'll receive assignments or action steps, and they'll evaluate and add to the crisis plan. Next slide, please. Oops. Okay. These are the do's and don'ts in the planning stage. You want to make sure that you're using the results to develop that plan of care with the team, and you want to make sure that you're monitoring progress. You don't want to develop too many needs or strategies, no matter how many actionable CANs items come from the CANs or your assessment tool. You don't want to overwhelm the family and the youth, as I said, and focus solely on their needs. I have a great example to share of that, of developing the plan and how to pool strengths and needs for that plan of care. And that is, I was, one evening I was getting my hair cut, and my hairstylist was explaining about her youth, her young son who's in middle school, and he struggles with some behavioral issues in school. He has had some anger issues and outbursts, and he is on an IEP for that. And she was explaining that the IEP team got together, and the whole team got together and stated that he was tardy almost every day for school. And she was saying, that's not possible. I drop him off myself. And they said, no, he's tardy, and that's a need. We have to address this. And so she was focusing on that. And they met again, and they said, he's still tardy a lot. And she's like, this is impossible. I'm dropping him off myself every day. Can you check the cameras and see, is he not coming in the building? She's like, I physically watch him. And so they did check the cameras, and they found that he was holding the door for other students every single morning. And rather than focusing on the need of him being in the classroom, being in his chair by the time the bell rings, that team could have easily focused on that he likes to help. He's a helper. And luckily, the assistant principal took charge and found ways that he could help throughout the school day that motivated him to get his work done, get his anger under control. And the reward was helping in different aspects of the day in school. So that's one way, one example of how you want to pool strengths and make them drive the plan, not so much just needs, because that isn't always motivational. Next slide, please. Oh, this is the implementation phase then, and this is where you actually make the plan work. And reason why we still want to include the assessment is because you're making any adjustments. Assessments are required to be updated every 90 days. So every team meeting, you could be having these conversations with families and assessing them about progress that's being made. And then you could go back and complete the updates of the assessments. Next slide. So the essential steps to implement in this phase are, this is where the team is meeting regularly. They're evaluating whether there's progress. They're celebrating successes, which is very important part of the plan of care and the team process. They're adjusting to make any changes that are needed. They're adding any team members that might be needed. And as I stated, they're also making sure that they're updating that assessment every 3 months to help track progress. So they're listening and they're going back and updating those assessments. Next slide. These are the do's and don'ts again of the implementation phase. You want to make sure that you're checking progress at every meeting and that you're completing items on to celebrate, and the progress of the meeting mission, the family's vision, and the outcomes. You don't want to ask the family to complete an assessment by another whole interview as the required 90 days. You just want to gather that information during the team meeting on your own, figuring out any progress and going back and filling out that assessment update yourself. And you don't want to spend the entire meeting on focusing on the assessment itself. And then the last phase is the transition phase. And this is where the team is starting to reach all of their goals, and they're preparing for the youth and family to transition out of wraparound or service coordination. And this is when the youth and the family decide how they'll continue to get support when needed, and how wraparound can be restarted if it's necessary. But you're taking those strengths and needs and you're using that in the transition process and reminding the family of how to access those strengths. This is, again, in the transition phase. How do you use those assessments? That information is, you're reviewing the team mission, you're reviewing this as the CAN scores or your other assessment tool, you're measuring progress that's being made, you're highlighting needs that have been met, you're discussing what life will look like after service coordination or wraparound. You will identify who will continue to be involved in the family's life. You can create or assign rehearsals or drills for a what if families get stuck in another situation, what will they do? Who will they turn to? And of course, you'll celebrate with the family and team. And you want to make sure that you're ensuring a warm handoff and you're tracking the family's success and progress. You don't want to use the change in assessments as the only indicator of readiness for transition. Sometimes families have reached their mission and they're ready to transition out. You wouldn't want to say, oh no, according to your assessment, we still have to work on this. So you don't want to just solely focus on that assessment tool. And you want to make sure that your actionable items aren't too much and that it's not overwhelming for them to transition out. Next slide. So we're also providing you with 2 handouts for you to go back and refer to on as well. This particular handout was created in partnership with the National Wraparound Initiative Center and the John Prade Foundation. So even though it does focus solely on the CANs, you can take the information for any assessment that you're currently using. We do highly recommend the CANs since it's so widely used across the state of Ohio. But this handout will be good for you to see, again, of what we reviewed today of how to use that assessment tool throughout the whole, all the phases of service coordination or wraparound. Next slide, please. And these are some suggested assessment prompts. When you're assessing with the family, these are some open-ended questions to have a conversation and get used to asking with families, rather than yes or no questions of do you do this? Do you have this? Do you use this? Those can tend to be intrusive, but this is more conversation prompts that you can listen and then go back and complete the assessment tool. I also highly recommend that you have someone else ask you these questions and you prepare to answer them fully to your personal life. This will get a sense for you to know how intrusive it is when we're asking these questions, and the easiest way to ask them without being intrusive and without being rude, and just having an open dialogue of how can we help. So we provided those for you. So next at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy and Pat, and they're going to have a discussion on the, as I said, the art or skill of assessing youth and families, and encourage your participation. Pat and Nancy.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm Nancy Lowry-Bregar, and have some background in wraparound and in service coordination from Cuyahoga County some years back. Pat?
I'm Pat Miles. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and have some experience with wraparound. Nancy, I'm gonna post the questions and answers we came up with. If you want to get started with this, that would be great.
Yeah. So one of the things that Jenny made clear was that it's the service coordinator's responsibility to find out about the family's strengths and as part of the assessment. But as she went through those slides, she said, you know, it's not just during the assessment that we get those and they kind of sit on a list somewhere, but they're used throughout. So effective service coordinators seek to find out strengths from the first moment that they're involved with the family through the time when they're no longer involved. And so I'd like to know from you how you go about seeking out strengths, and how you do that, not just from the assessment questions in the beginning, but throughout the involvement of your time with the youth and family. I'm sure some of you are doing that. So
So let me back up first of all. You guys are all working for FCFCs, right? Which means you hear about kids and families before they actually get to you. Is that right? I mean, it always has seemed to me that you guys kind of, if I were going to conceptualize the whole service system as one office with lots of cubicles, it seems like your cubicle is right where everybody gathers to talk and you start hearing about things, is what I often think about with you guys. So my first question, and it has to do with what Nancy said, piggybacking on that, when you first start hearing about a family, how do you start thinking about strengths? Because I got to believe people don't come to you saying, oh, I can hardly wait for you to meet this family who does this, this, and this, and they're so great and it's so exciting. My sense is they probably come to you when the house is on fire or the air's out of the tires or something like that. So I'm curious about even that first kind of whisper in the wind that a child and family is coming to you. How easy is it for you to think about strengths when you first hear kind of on the drumbeat on the horizon, they're coming? How much do you hear about the strengths of the child and or family?
I think one of the things we start hearing early on, if I'm understanding your question, as we're getting a referral or as someone is calling us and saying, hey, I have a family that really needs your supports. What we're also hearing, if we listen closely, is how is the family putting out fires? How are they addressing things? Do we have a parent or are both parents, working as a team, or is one parent kind of doing it solo? And how assertive are they? How I don't want to say aggressive. That has a negative connotation, but
I bet you hear that in that first phone call.
Yeah, like
right?
how actively are they really? We have some parents that they're just knocking on every door and they're not going to stop knocking until they get some answers. And then we have some others who have, quite frankly, kind of been beaten down and they're just not feeling strong. So you can pick up on some of those things and how they're addressing the challenges.
So, and to kind of unpack that a little bit, Cindy, I bet that when you get the first call, it's not, oh, this is a very assertive parent who really has been very actively. It's more like, oh my God,
right?
This person's been kicking down every door. This mom, I mean, these are the things. This mom's really angry. I don't know what's going on. I think they need service coordination. And what I'm hearing is when you get that message in your brain, you're flipping the script already from that first point of contact.
Yeah, I think you have to. If you look at it from, mom's perspective, she's just determined, like there's an answer we haven't hit on yet. How do we get there? And so, yeah, I think that has to be the first strength you kind of latch onto,
So what I want to comment on is I think that's a talent, a skill, and a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a more environment where that's not the usual and customary language, you have to work at developing the talent, the skill, and commit to the choice. And and so it's interesting for me to think about how long it takes you to get to the point where it's a comfortable choice, not a conscious choice. To be able to do.
I was looking at, Liz, your comment where you say that in the chat box that you just try and talk to the family. So here you have this family that Cindy just described, who's kind of in maybe a little bit of a panic mode, and you try and find out what the kids are good at. How do you make that transition from that panic mode to trying to find out what the family members, the parent, the kids are good at, what they enjoy?
So I like to talk about the two parts of service coordination. So I talk about those services, things we can put in place, but then I also talk about the fun part, which is that strength building and how we can use some of those FCSS monies to do some fun things for the kids. And then I might even state things that I've done with other kids to kind of get that ball rolling.
So you point out some of the benefits of being involved with you, not just around problem solving, but about enhancing their lives. Mm-hmm.
So your tagline is you can have service coordination and fun too. Is that right, Liz?
Yeah,
Putting
and
the fun in service coordination.
Yeah, like for some of my teenagers, especially, we funded some drivers training here recently. And so I don't want to say I use that as an incentive, but I definitely do. And I'll say, hey, if you're open to these other services, we can do really fun things too. And that kind of gets them excited.
Yeah. So Jamie, you talk about similarly that you talk about what they like about their child. How do you, what kinds of responses do you get to that?
Hi. So typically those kind of vary. I usually use that as a question towards the end of the meeting, right? At the beginning of the meeting, we're doing like de-escalation, airing frustrations, all of that stuff. And then towards the end, I do ask what they like about their child. And even the most difficult situations, usually the parents will say something about their kind. If they're kind of really struggling on what to say, I have asked, what are some things that you like to do together, to see if there is any of that, because obviously if they're not doing any activities together as a family, that's somewhere to build some strengths to come together. But if there are, and those work out well, right? And like you're able to go to the store and there's not behavioral issues, what's happening there that's positive that could maybe be replicated elsewhere.
Thank you. How do you, it sounds like many of you really feel like that strength focus is so important, and you begin to demonstrate it early on. How do you pass that on to the other people from other systems, other service providers, so that they're also recognizing that instead of focusing on the problem, the past?
I think it's how you communicate in the introduction of the family, like, hey, I have a family, I'm referring to you. And then it's all in what your message is. If your message is positive and strength focused, I think you've done all you can do to kind of deliver that in a strong way and help, and hopefully they pick it up at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of subtle hints, right? I mean, I think that's interesting, even from the first phone call, when somebody says, I've got this mom and nothing makes her happy and she's knocking down doors, and you go, wow, she sounds like she's really working to get something for a kid. I can hardly wait to meet her. Then you circle back around and say, we're going to have a team meeting, and you start by building a new frame around the family and their story. And so I think that that's a lot of subtle hints over time. I have two thoughts about that. One is I'm guessing in your communities, people have gotten used to you So they kind of know, oh, I've got to call Cindy, she's going to be strength-based, or I'm going to call Liz and she's going to make it fun. And so they kind of understand the language with you, but what about it when they really can't get there, either because they're worried or because they have a bias or because of their worldview? We've got to fix the problem. I'm curious, when hinting isn't enough, how you manage that in terms of creating a strength contagion, if you will.
So I think people need to hear hope, and I think hope can be communicated in lots of different ways. Sometimes I don't need to say a lot about it. I just kind of communicate that I'm paying attention and I'm going to do whatever I can do to kind of move us forward. Other times I really have to talk very specifically about hope, and hey, there's hope, and how are we gonna find, some hope here in a couple, in a little bit, what's the most simple way, what's the most simple thing I can do quickly that will provide some hope? And I think really that feeling of hope kind of adds to being able to look at what is being done well already. What are you already doing well? You're showing up, maybe that's the strength. You're showing up, you're still here fighting the fight. But I think it all kind of just goes back to that sowing of a hopeful feeling.
I think both Tiffany and Steve, both of your last comments really address Cindy's idea of hope. Tiffany, do you want to talk about, how you remind people of what they've done so that they can see their progress, or Steve, the analysis about what's better and being able to move forward? Because I think both of those are hope related. Tiffany, Steve?
I've noticed with my clients, a lot of times they gloss over things they've been through, and they don't want to maybe acknowledge maybe how hard that was, or what they've done, where they've gotten from here to there already. And so a lot of times when I'm asking them questions and stuff, or we're talking, they'll gloss over about how they were homeless maybe for a year or something. And I go, wow, you went from that to that, that's a big thing. You were able to do that. And they're like, well, yeah, I had to. And I'm like, not everybody has to, not everybody does though. And I have to kind of remind them, you did. And it's kind of like a pat on their back, because they don't get that often. They get the negative, and they see that as a negative. Well, I became homeless because, yeah, but you got yourself out. That's the whole, and if we can bring that type of attitude that you were able to do that to the rest of it, we can keep pushing it on. We can keep going. And so, but I think they forget that.
Yeah, I think that appreciation of what they've done, what they've been through, that stance of, and I think that's also a way of being able to help others be able to see the strengths in families. Yeah. Steve, did you want to add anything?
I guess I'll just say that, I think that one of the things that asking them that, what would this look like if it was better, question, is it helps them to be able to express what they want, even if they don't know the right words for it, even if they don't know, they maybe can't operationalize it. They just know what it is that is on their heart, and so, maybe they say something like, well, I just want my child to not be autistic. And well, we can't fix autistic, but if you help them then say, okay, and then what do you want for them? If they weren't autistic, what would you want for them? And they can say things like, well, I want them to have friends, and I want them to be able to interact at family functions. And I want them to, and they start describing the life that they want, for the child rather than the label. And then those become things that you can actually address. And you can say, well, maybe we can't, make a person, maybe we don't really have a magic wand and can't make a person not have autism, for example. But we can do these other things. These are things that we can work on. These are things that can actually be steps to making your life look closer to what you identified as better. And so I feel like it gets at that analysis piece and helps them to operationalize what they really want, even if they don't have the words, even if they don't know how to break it down into steps, even if they don't know what can be actionable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a nice segue into what good needs statements do, it's that.
Before you do that,
Okay.
as you know, I always think in slogans. So now I've created the 4 H's of strength-based work in FCFC service coordination, which are honoring, which we got from Tiffany. You honor people's history, which are hopeful, which we got from Cindy, which are humorous, which we got from Liz, and are heart-filled, which we got from Steve. So now I'm just going to warn you, I'll probably do some kind of graphic and send it to Nancy, and then somehow y'all get it. But I just have this image of the 4 H's of strength-based work and service coordination in Ohio, which came from you. So I had to get it out of my head or it'd be there all day. So thank you for listening. Now you're ready to segue into needs-based.
No, I love that synopsis, because isn't that what strengths are all about? Honoring, hopeful, humorous, heartfelt. It just is it's a whole package. And I love that your mind thinks in those kinds of alliterations so that we get the benefits of that. But like I was saying about Steve's, he was talking about what's better. And I love the idea of, because I remember doing a similar thing with people when they said they needed residential treatment. It was like, well, what do you think you're going to get in residential treatment? And then they can start talking about the pieces as opposed to what they consider the end product. And so good needs statements both explain the positive or the possible reasons why a behavior or a problem matters. And I think that's what you were talking about, Steve. Autism matters. I want them not to have autism so that they can have friends, and it matters, and so understanding why that is, and then it enhances the understanding and the connection to the parent and the child's experience. And I think your example again with the child with autism, it matters because I want my child to have this broader experience, and I don't want them to be defined by their limitations. So tell me about how you go about using those kinds of understandings of the family to craft needs statements.
Good morning, everybody. I'll jump in and tell you that I, almost 2 years in, still struggle with need statements. And one of the things that I found very helpful in trainings with Neil and some of the readings that were provided were if we simply change the word from need to deserve. And if we talk about that for just a few minutes, this family deserves to, and look at it from that viewpoint for a few minutes, it kind of helps. But that being said, I'm back here to join you all today because I do struggle with need statements and am anxious to hear this conversation.
So I think changing the word to deserve in my head works. I'll tell you where I've run into a brick wall with it is when I try to bring it into sometimes a team meeting when people are angry with either the parent or the child, because then we get into a debate about, well, he doesn't deserve this until he straightens up and flies right. You know that. So in my head, that's a way for me to screen a decent needs statement, whether I've started with a why. But I've found that not all the time when I bring that to teams, do they land on that and go, oh, that makes so much sense. And I think it has to do with your stance about the work and about the family. I think if you can cultivate that talent or incorporate a strength-based perspective into who you are and the way you do the work, it's easier to get to that idea that when we're talking about deserves, it's really about they really deserve to have joy. They really deserve to have fun. They really deserve to have that. And I think that gets very political very quickly when I say that out loud, which is, it's so, I think it's a great internal tool. I have found myself in the middle of a buzzsaw as an external tool, getting into a big debate about whether he deserves it or not. But I do think what you talked about, Stacy, around struggling with need statements, I hear that a lot. And I think what happens is I was just jotting down kind of, I think need statements want statements get framed as need statements. Must statements get framed as need statements. Have to statements get framed as need statements. You know, and I think about all that and say, how do I adopt a stance that looks wide and understands the reasoning behind a condition and create space to really ask the next best question so I can understand it and craft the statement, number one. And number two, how do I have enough courage to take those possibilities or those hunches to a team when they all may be sitting on a position that they feel very strongly about? I don't care what you say with your silly social worker games. He needs to go to school, or he needs to go to class, rather than let's understand why he needs to not be there.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Jenny's example about the little boy who was not getting to class, you know, with the focus on he needs to, instead of understanding the reasons for the behavior existing and understanding the child's experience. It's very different. He has to go to class. He has to be on time versus the understanding him is that desire to be helpful, and it changes the whole approach there.
What causes you to struggle, Stacy, with need statements?
Well, I liked what somebody said earlier about kind of keep it simple. You know, don't necessarily have 700 of them. There may be 700, but then that it all feels so overwhelming when we're trying to address it in the planning process. So I guess when we're just writing those family discoveries and starting that general, you know, you want it to be right. You want to hit that nail on the head. And to be honest, sometimes we get more. I need to work on being a better listener, because when they're telling us what the pain is, I just need to be able to absorb that and hear it in a way that can help me formulate those need statements.
I think that phrase, when you're hearing what the pain is, I think that's doing a lot of lifting in that sentence. Mm-hmm. Because I think where you guys sit is really about bearing witness in many respects to pain. That part of your healing process is to bear witness. And I think what you do is you translate that pain into words. That's what need statements are. They ain't magic. And I think about, I've been doing this a very long time, and I'm quite good at need statements because I practice a lot, especially in my head with my most annoying relatives, which I found to be a very good technique to at least get me through the holidays without blowing up things. But I think what need statements do is they create words for people's pain. As you guys may have heard this concept of the hole in the heart. I think what need statements do is they create language around the hole in your heart. And I think that's scary for people. I think it's scary. One, how do you take it in? Two, how do you sit with it and trust that the people you're bringing together will be able to do something about it rather than you moving to action very quickly? And three, how do you prepare other people to also bear witness to pain, which again is a choice, is a talent, is a skill that we need to be able to cultivate. To be able to sit with that matters. And how do you do that in a way that doesn't eliminate hope? to Cindy's, to keep your 4-H's alive. How do you do that in a way that says, I can see that hole in your heart, and guess what? We can do something about it. We may not be able to mend it completely, but we can do something about it. You've got to trust the process enough to be able to do that. What's that make you think of, Nancy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is making me think of something, but it has more to do with the hole in the heart, and how I think that when I think about hole in the heart, I think that everybody has multiple holes in their heart whenever unmet needs are, and that we're like Swiss cheese. Some of us with pinprick, Lorraine Swiss. Some of us with the Swiss cheese that are the ribbons, and so different people's holes in the heart impact their lives to varying degrees, and we're not able necessarily to. And I also think about holes in the heart like a wound on your hand. If it's open, you drop a little lemon juice and suddenly it's super painful again. And I think when we discuss these concerns with families, it's like putting lemon juice on that pain. But then if we can help them with the resilience that I think Tiffany talked about, but the being able to just have a scab on it, the pain, the hole isn't, the wound isn't going away, but if it can just be scabbed, you drop a little lemon juice on that and the whole neural pathway is different, and so that's what holes in the heart make me think about.
So that gets to, I heard Stacy, you say, I worry about getting it right. And I think what I want to say to you is, don't worry about getting it right, just worry about getting it. Because even if you get it wrong, you find out that this hole in my heart actually relates to that hole in my heart. If we go back to Nancy's metaphor of Swiss cheese, people find healing from being recognized, from being honored, from being all of that. When Tiffany says that must have been hard, that is a moment where somebody feels seen, heard, and understood. That's a big deal. And I don't know that getting the right need and doing something about it is more important than Tiffany saying, wait, did you say your family didn't have a house for a year? Do you realize how important that is? I think those are the things that people remember. And part of what you're trying to construct with service coordination is more opportunities for people to remember those moments. I firmly believe healing happens in the hallway, not in the big meeting. So as I think about need statements and holes in the heart, that's what I think about. It's don't worry about getting it right, just worry about getting it. Family will tell you. And here's the other thing, they're going to name their hole in the heart in a way that's most comfortable to them. Y'all think about, are any of you continuing to this day to work on something about yourself that you can do better on? If I said, let's open that by starting there and then let's explore what your hole in the heart is, y'all are going to say to me, I'm going to name it the way I want to name it. Don't you dare name it for me. And so people will lead us to where we need to go when it goes to need statements.
That makes me think about things that my supervisor, Leah, shares with us when the teams are stuck and we're just not making any progress or feeling any hope. She constantly comes back to, well, are we planning around the right need? Maybe you just need to open that up to the team. And it's amazing that simple, it's just like a funnel. It just opens up and you're like, well, no, that's not really what I want to be working on. I want to work on something else. And it comes right out of their mouths. And then we all see it in a clearer light.
See, and I think the healing part of that is, I think it's somewhat comforting to find out not only did the other side of the counter make a mistake, but they're correcting it. And it's an imperfect science. Let's be clear about that. We train, we talked about this yesterday, Nancy, we train to the ideal, but the reality is you live in the practical. And I find it strangely comforting when a professional says, oh, I made a mistake, but we can do something about it. Because then I think, I can relate to that in my life.
Yeah, and I think, Pat, that's the absolute perfect segue for this last 10 minutes about progress, because that's exactly what we're talking about, that we recognize that we put something into place and it may or may not work. So outcomes aren't a defined end, but a process of reviewing, listening, like you're talking about, Stacy, saying, maybe we're not working on the right need, and raising that with the team, and having families come back and say, damn straight, you're not working on the right thing right now. And so that being the case, our willingness to make adjustments in order to have better outcomes. So, Pat, I really think that see, again, her alliteration, she has 3 P's related to progress.
3 F's.
Oh, 3 F's. 3 F's related to progress. So you want to talk about those and then get people's reactions? Because I love that framework of the 3 F's.
So you guys have heard that saying, good, fast, and cheap, pick 2. Have you guys heard that? Every contractor I know says that. You can have a good product, you can have a fast product, you can have a cheap product, pick 2. And I swear to God, every time I've had any work done in my house, they've started with that statement. So bringing that into this world, I'm going to talk to you about these 3 F's, and I'm going to tell you, while we want all 3, sometimes 2 is good enough. And the first is when we think about progress, to think about it in terms of fact. Do you see the behavioral outcomes that indicate that things are getting better? Do you have a good count? That's always tricky in wraparound or service coordination, because quite frankly, you're busy. And so creating good counts and simple counts takes some time, and we can devolve into overcounting. But the question would be, if I convince this child every day, if I got all the adults around this child to every day do one thing that convinced the child that he was wanted, would he quit beating us up? Would he quit beating us up? I mean, would we see a reduction in that? And so I'm going to count that. Now I'm going to report on the positive, the number of days he didn't beat us up, but I'm going to count the negative because it's easier to count. That's the outcome. Your CANS assessment could be part of that. So the first F is fact, are the outcomes showing? The second is follow through. Did we keep our promise? And, I have angst, I'll be frank, about both moderate service coordination plans and wraparound plans, because when I look at them, I always look to see, are the tasks distributed? Or do I often see the child or the parent as the person with the task? For example, I will often read in wraparound plans, the child will participate in therapy. And I'm like, why would you write it that way? Wouldn't you write, the therapist will engage the child effectively in therapy? And you hear the difference in terms of who's responsible. But often in those plans, they look like templates for the child or family. And I don't see other people having a lot of action, or if they do, it's sort of a referral kind of thing. So I really look for distribution. But the real question is follow through. Did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we keep our promise? That's true for the parent and the child, as well as other team members. And so the second F is follow through, and the last F is feeling. And that has to do with, do you feel like things are better? And you know this. So if the fact says the child's getting to class on time, and the follow through is the teacher meets him at the door and walks him to class, but the feeling is mom still has anxiety about whether he's doing well in school, I don't care where you're at in your process, that mom is not going quietly into the good night when you say it's time to end. It's not going to happen. I'm going to get a call from you that says the mom is sabotaging our transition plan. So we have to look at those 3 things, fact, feeling, and follow through, and say, where's kind of the special target that will help us get there? The feeling is simply, in my mind, is asking people to rate their percentage of met need at a certain time. And we have different things that we can use around that. I like to use, right now, I've been back to using thermometers and having parents and kids color them in with their need statements. And then I can compare Where are we getting on that? And there's some kind of, just the act of asking helps people feel better. So, and they're on the handout that we did post in the handout.
Right.
Steve, you talked about system conditions causing a filtering.
Yeah, I was just going to ask him about that myself.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's just that, we too often are conditioned ourselves to look at deficits because, we identify our job as providing, resources to combat deficits. And so I think we end up subconsciously, projecting that onto our families and teaching them, as I said, to limit their dreams to, to filter everything through these negative lenses, of, well, that can't because, well, that can't because. And so then instead of, sort of dreaming big, but then maybe only accomplishing part of it, people end up assuming the worst. And then that's what they find, that's the outcome.
Getting 90% of a 10% goal rather than 50% of a 100% goal is sort of the design about that. Are there particular trends you see where some kind of a system perspective can limit that discussion?
I don't know. I do think that the language we use is important. I guess that's one of the things that I emphasize, is that how we talk and how we label has a lot of power in how families perceive. And so I don't know, in my mind, that goes a long way towards us learning to use positive language.
And one of the things that I'm interested in is the first point of contact with a family from a system and how that creates a frame around how families talk about it today, even when that first point of contact feels like 100 years ago. The first point of unusual contact. If child welfare is the first point of unusual contact, if the school district, if it happens, if it's a health condition, I've noticed that comes forward sometimes 10, 12 years later when I meet the child, that it sets the frame. So I always like to go back to say, what was that first doorway you went through? And how did that impact the way you talk about today? Because it's amazing how that naming can set the stage for the conversation today.
I also like Tiffany's comment. It's kind of like the golden rule of communication. I always try to talk to my clients or others the way I want to be talked to. It's yeah, a little bit like Jenny's question, open-ended questions. Have someone ask you those questions and see how it makes you feel. And maybe you'll scratch some of those all together, or maybe you'll just change your tone of voice in asking, because that sense of how would I respond to some of the things that I'm saying to other people.
And whatever you do, never ever ask unless you're prepared for any answer you get, right? Do not ask the question unless you're ready for the answer you never imagined, and manage yourself when you get the question that makes you go, oh, or get the answer that makes you go, oh, I really wish I hadn't asked that.
Yeah.
So be careful what you wish for.
Well, we are approaching our time here. If there's any last questions or comments, we do want to thank Pat and Nancy for joining us this morning, and we want to thank you all for joining, and especially those that participated and added their comments of experiences. We do want to remind you too that we've downloaded the slides today and all of the handouts that were shared. Those are in the chat, and we will be later posting that on our website as well. And we've also put a link to a survey. This short survey really helps all of us know if this was helpful, if we need to improve on anything. So if you don't mind clicking that link to the survey and filling that out It's very short. We would greatly appreciate it. So with that, if anyone has any last minute questions or anything, you're welcome to put it in the chat too. Otherwise, we appreciate you. We appreciate you participating, and we look forward to you when we meet again. Our next topic, we're going to meet we're going to meet on the macro level as well. That's coming up. I believe it's next week. Is it next Tuesday? If someone could confirm that with me. We're going to talk about the macro level, assessing your partners' strengths and needs, your community partners, and how you pull that into a community plan and your shared plans. And then our next topic will be selecting and engaging community services and supports. And we're really excited about that. Pat and Nancy have developed a phenomenal tool that we'll be reviewing with you on how to do that. So thank you everyone so much for your time. We hope you have a great week.